let's see. We'll go to Cody in Louisville, Kentucky, who's questioning and wants to know about the emotional side of transitioning out of theism. And you're on with Tracie and Phil. Can you give us a little bit of context around that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me well enough?
Yeah,
you're good.
Very clear, very clear.
Great. So a little bit of context would be 6 months ago, if you would have asked me kind of where I'm at in my life, growing up in the church, in a non-denominational, but, we took the Bible literally. And I kind of came to the position in my faith that, I was going to do ministry. I was actually wanting to be a missionary. And I work for a missions nonprofit currently. But for some reason, I don't know what happened. Actually, I can't even point to a direct question or time. That faith just starting to unravel. I'm kind of taking a step back and just reconsidering kind of from a neutral position, what's true? Was I justified in those beliefs?
Let me stop you for a minute. Let me just stop you for a minute, because that, I got to say, that's interesting. We don't normally get these, sort of deconversionist-ish testimonials where somebody says, and for no reason, I just stopped believing. So you just literally started to not believe it anymore, and there was no sort of, this seems irrational, or, nothing?
So
I believed and I just stopped believing?
I know I put theist when they asked me to call in. I said, I think I'll go with theist.
I get you. I get you.
But so I don't know that I'm in a position where I can say I absolutely don't believe.
No, but you did believe, and now you're kind of like, so I just started questioning for no reason. Like it was the same thing that I was thinking yesterday, except today I thought maybe it's not real.
Yeah, was it a process? Was it a gradual thing, or?
I would say it might have collapsed under some weight, because I did study philosophy and religious studies in college, so I've always been a deep thinker and being able to be critical and
so stuff just maybe ruminated for a while. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So really, my question, as much as I would love to talk about some of the big questions and things I'm wrestling with, but I think you guys have talked about it quite a bit on the show. And so my question is more, as I've dealt with people that are in my faith about this, really talked about it and shared with my questions, I've had some bad experiences as well as some good ones of people I really care about that are like, have you even prayed about this? And like, are you really like,
no, as a churchgoer, I never thought to pray about it. Right. Like that. No, I hadn't prayed yet. Guys, maybe I'll try that.
I don't do that. And so, it's just, frankly, just makes a lot of anxiety and stress pop up, even that Protestant guilt, like, am I just darkened in my understanding, and am I too worldly? Like those things pop up just after being in it for so long.
Okay.
And I guess what I'm wondering what you guys would think, what you would say to someone who's in this position. How do I maybe navigate through some of those, the real emotional side of what this doubting and questioning process is like?
Yeah, that's.
I'm pretty emotionally shallow, so it's hard for me to be useful. Phil is the more emotional. He's more. I don't mean like.
No, I'm playing.
That's not negative. He has more emotional intelligence than I do. So I'm gonna see what Phil has to say.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult path to navigate, and everyone's situation is very unique. You have different family dynamics. You have different religious dynamics. Your church, like it can be very unique. It's a unique experience, but I will say that in my deconversion, as time kind of went on, and I got to understand, like, potentially I could lose contact with certain people because, for some family members, they may be okay with this. They can accept it, but others, well, that's too much for others. And so, for me, it was number one, being comfortable with understanding where I was at that time, and so it was being honest with myself and saying that I actually did have questions about this thing that I was brought up with this entire time and was told that this was the way that I should believe, and to not do this is incorrect and wrong and, should be dissuaded at all costs because your soul is on the line. And yet these arguments weren't persuasive to me. And it was being honest with myself and really understanding that this is the way that I felt, that I was no longer convinced that a deity existed, even though at that time, this is going back quite a few years ago, I wanted it to be true that a deity exists. And, there was no way that I could force myself because, those doubts would kind of would creep right back in, saying that, if I'm believing this one, why do I believe this one and not this particular sect of Christianity? And why is it limited to just Christianity when there's so many different variants of religion out there? Why am I pigeonholing here? And being honest with myself and realizing that it was because, I was raised in this. This is what was taught to me. And that made me start feeling okay about it, that I felt comfortable in my reasoning that if I wasn't brought up in this, I probably wouldn't be believing this particular set. If I was born somewhere else or in another family or whatever else. And not only that, is that other person that has a completely different belief than I do feels just as strongly about it as I did when I believed. And I had no reason to say that they were wrong and I was right, except for, this is just the way it is. This is the way I was taught. It was really a journey of becoming okay with saying I don't know, with saying that I want to find out more information, that I was okay. It was okay to question, even though that was cautioned against. That you shouldn't be questioning this thing. Like this is not something for you to question. Who are you to question? Was in some ways the way it was put, but for me, it was just being honest. I didn't believe this. I was doubting this, and I have these reasons, and they seem very valid to me while I was in college. And so I just said, okay, I will step back, and I'm going to explore. I'm going to take an honest exploration of how I came to this belief, what's keeping me in it, and why I'm not a believer in something else. And that's the kind of path that led me there. But it didn't change the family dynamics that were there, and the fact that my family is very religious and that they pray at every occasion that we get to. And the risk of losing someone or losing those connections was real. And I kind of insulated myself by kind of building a family of my own to a degree, and knowing that if this did happen, I would still be okay. And being kind of solid in that and moving forward from there. But yeah, it was there's no magic bullet. There's nothing that I say, you can just think this and you'll be fine. It wasn't anything on one side. It was quite a journey, but, I made it through the other side just by, persevering.
Yeah, and in dealing with the non-emotional aspect of it, just to sort of add to something that Phil was saying, whenever a person has a doubt about a thing, like if I believe something and someone says something to me or I encounter some information or whatever it is, that I start wondering wait a minute, am I sure about this? The normal thing for a human being to do is to go and research it and get better information, right? So you go to a really good source for that information. Like if I didn't know if I was having doubts about my house foundation, I wouldn't just sit around praying about it, right? I would call somebody to come out and look. I would call a foundation company or 2 or 3 and say, can you come out and give me an assessment about what's going on with my foundation? Is it okay? Because this crack developed, is it a crack I need to worry about? Or is this just a crack that's nothing? Or what is this? So if I had a doubt about something that was stressing me out, I would do everything I could to get more information. And I would think that if God, doesn't like doubts, that he would be okay with somebody going and looking into it, right? Because the idea is that if he doesn't like doubts, he should have given you, and I don't mean should have like he didn't, but shouldn't he have given you information sufficient to be convincing if doubts are a bad thing? Isn't that just reasonable?
Yeah.
I mean, he's God.
I would say it would be reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, and he should know what's sufficient to make people not feel full of doubts. So if you have doubts about this, and God doesn't like doubts, and he didn't give you enough information to allow you to dispel those doubts, and you're looking at all the info and you're reading and you're studying and you're saying, and you're still seeing problems, eventually it's kind of like, I guess, going to be with any issue. If you're not sure whether or not to accept the claim as true, and you start looking into it and you just can't get a good answer, right? Ultimately, if it's not religion, you're just going to say, I'm not going to believe this because I can't really find anything solid. Mm-hmm. Right? So you would just step off that belief and say, I'm going to have to wait and see if something better comes up because I can't find anything to support. Like even something as simple as, did a person, I've always attributed this quote to somebody, but is that who said it? And you go and you look it up and you start finding 3 or 4 attributions, and you find some websites saying, well, we don't really know where this quote was first attributed, 100 years after they died and by this person. And ultimately you're just like, yeah, I don't know if they actually said it or not. I mean, it's attributed to them, but I'm not going to die on that hill, right? Because who knows?
Right. Just kind of an anecdote on that. I mean, someone quoted me scripture from Ephesians, and I was like, to be frank, most historians don't think Paul wrote Ephesians. Right. And, just kind of flabbergasted, like, how could you ever say such a thing?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I remember somebody in my church told me that we knew that all the New Testament Gospels, I guess they were saying we knew, all the New Testament Gospels, or all of the New Testament books were inspired by God because they were all written by apostles, which doesn't mean they were, even if God inspired apostles, doesn't mean that everything they write isn't, what I mean? It was like, it just didn't make sense. But the point is, Luke's not an apostle. So, I mean, even what they're telling me is like, this is why we can believe it. And it's like, yeah, but that's not even true. Mm-hmm. Like, even by your own standards, all the books are not written by apostles. So why are you saying that, right? I mean, even if we take the attributions and everything at face value, what you just said about it isn't true. If you believe it's only trustworthy if it's written by an apostle, why don't you toss Luke out? Right? Like, he's not an apostle, so what's he doing in there? And what you're going to get, when I was walking away from the church, I got such unsatisfactory answers. All of my own research was so much more valid than what people were telling me. And it was so stunning to see these lifelong Christians in the Church of Christ who would give me these explanations for things that just were absolutely false, showed they had never looked into it, that they had no idea what the facts were behind how this or that book ended up in the Bible, or how this or that piece of history didn't align, and it was just like, where are you getting they would just say stuff, right? They would just desperately fling stuff out there like, here's why, and they were just making crap up. And ultimately, the preacher said to me that, I just have to believe that God had a hand in putting this Bible together. And I'm just like, so what is that, right? Like, you could just say, I just believe that God had a hand in building the, Islam. Like, I believe God, appointed the Pope. Like, I just have to believe it, right? I mean, like Phil was saying, ultimately, if that's the foundation of your belief, that applies to anything. Mm-hmm. I just have to believe it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that hits at probably the flip side of my question, that not only, is it going to be, emotional and hard and a long process for me, but also for other people, recognizing that, if they're completely convinced of this and, there's no questioning to be had, it's going to be emotional for them too because of the apparent consequences, right? If I walk away, the chance of, going to hell, and they care about me, and that's going to be hard for them to take too. And
tough.
So, I've already seen the strain on some close relationships.
Okay. That's where Phil comes in. Back to Phil.
Right.
For help with that, because I was just like, goodbye, family. Moving to Texas.
That is funny.
Yeah.
That is funny.
Wasn't hard.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a thing for family, and you did hear that they were afraid for my soul, and I know I had that conversation with my mother before over several issues, and me being gay first, and that's where she kind of went that route, and she was scared for me, but more so scared about other people being assholes and attacking me, was one of the reasons that she didn't want me to go to Pride, because she was afraid of somebody that was religious that would attack, which was a very interesting one side. But yeah, that's a real fear for believers, and if they sincerely believe it, you know, to them this is serious. This is life and death, and I recognize that. But being true to myself and being honest with myself, I'm not going to try to lie just to make someone feel better, to say like, oh, what you believe, or try to fake a prayer. It just depends on the situation, because I don't think my grandmothers knew on that side, but my family knows now. It's on Facebook. It's all
well, and I know that
but
Matt went through that, right? So he's talked a lot about having conversations with his family members, and one of the things he ultimately had to do with one very concerned member was just to say, if you believe in this God, and this God wants me to come back to church, then you just have to pray that your God, brings me back to church, and leave it in the hands of your God. And we can't have this conversation like every time we're together. So, I mean, it's up to you. When you have people that care about you, you have to sort of gauge how much interaction is useful. And if it stops being useful, it starts to become just like a broken record with the same conversation every time you're seeing them. Then you might have to just kind of put a hammer down and say, can't have this conversation. We've talked about it before. We don't see eye to eye. And you have this belief in God, and you have this faith and trust in God. So take it to your God and ask, and if your God one day decides to, change my wrong-headed view of its existence, then so be it. Then I'm sure it'll happen, because we're talking about a God. Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with setting boundaries, for sure. I mean, it can help save relationships that are there, and that it's we don't talk about the fact that Phil's an atheist and that he's gay. We don't hit those subjects. We just kind of move along and talk about weather and presence, and
but it can be scary
else.
To test when you have to put it to the test and say, do you really care about me, or is this religious perspective more important to you than my relationship with you? And some people are going to say the religion is. Those are the authoritarians that I was talking about previously, right? The people that believe that every person is there to serve the church, and if you're not serving the church, then you're not worth having in their life. And there are other churches that say that the church is here to serve you, right? And if these people are in a church that has basically hijacked them as tools and told them that anybody that's not willing to be a tool doesn't fit in and isn't acceptable, then they'll be rejecting you. But that it just sort of depends on the people, depends on the doctrines. And I've even seen people with very strict religious authoritarian doctrines like Jehovah's Witnesses that end up bending those rules, because they just basically would come up with any reason they could to say these rules, somehow don't apply in this situation, because I just can't, break off with this person. I'm too close to them, and they mean too much, and I have to have them in my life. And so they've even flexed with some groups on that. So you just never know. It's hard to predict how people will react. You just have to use your best judgment based on what you know about the person, but even then you could be surprised. Sometimes positively.
Yeah. Right. And I think, how you guys are talking about maybe after you've made the decision, that certainly boundaries are important and setting that up, and you're obviously still happy to talk about where you're at and how you're dealing with these issues. But in this kind of figuring it out stage, it is kind of a curious thing that I'm like, I'm just going to question everything and see what comes out on the other side. It's still a curious thing for people, I think, to hear. For some that it's like, how could you even think these things?
Right.
So. Well, what kind of a God is afraid of a few questions?
Yeah. Yep. I would agree.
What's a little investigation?
And loving. Yeah, I think some investigation is due. Yeah. So, well, guys, I really do appreciate it.
I remember having that little conversation.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Cody.